First of all, I'd just like to say it is always such a pleasure being here with such a group of men that I respect and appreciate. And it's always a nice 2 days to get together and be here together. And thank you, Jeff, for organizing that. And those of you here at Exton for helping make this possible. We're going to be talking about arguments for the critics for a 2nd century BC date. We look in the Bible and we see Daniel really at the end of the 6th century coming into Babylon, and then his career there and the different challenges and his integrity and everything. Of course, the 3 Hebrews with him in the 5th century BC. But of course, as most of you know, critics, and if you go take a college course or anything, it's going to say the book of Daniel is written in the 2nd century looking backwards. Instead of Daniel being in the 5th century, and he has predicted, say, Alexander the Great and Antiochus Epiphanes, they would say, no, it's written in the 2nd century around 168, 165, somewhere in there, and he's looking backwards. This argument's been around a long time. Porphyry, back in the 3rd century AD, a Greek philosopher, wrote against the Christians. He said that Daniel is not composed by the person whom it's inscribed in the title. It was written by some individual living in Judea at the time of Antiochus, who was named Epiphanes. Daniel did not foretell the future, he says, so much as he related the past. So instead of predictions, that part of the book would be post-dictions. Lastly, whatever he spoke of up until the time of Antiochus contained authentic history, detail, whereas anything that he may have conjectured beyond that point was false, inasmuch as he would not have foreknown the future. Critics have a lot of arguments that they compiled along this point. Here's kind of summarized from Driver's famous commentary back in the 1800s, or excuse me, 1900. And we're not going to go over all of these. He himself acknowledges that these last ones there aren't as strong on the historical section. He singles out 4 of them as being, he thinks, kind of insurmountable or just really strong. He thinks this one's stronger than those. And so we're going to focus on 4 out of 5 of those that he thinks are particularly strong up there. We're also going to focus on the first one because that's the one a lot of people seem to start with. Hammer starts with that one. He leads off on page 1. And we're going to focus on this one. We're not going to talk about the theology part, that's the theology is too late. And other people are going to be talking about the end of the book. And so this assumption that the predictions couldn't be true because he couldn't have predicted the future, and that you get up to a certain point it's accurate, and then they would say it's unreliable or vague after that. Those arguments, I'm not going to be getting into those. People that are dealing with the later part of the book can take a look at some of those things. But here's what we're going to be looking at. But first, let me say this. You notice here is the basis I've got, includes but not limited to, oftentimes, that is, a rejection of miracles and prophecy. If you're an unbeliever, if you read 1 Corinthians, is 1 Corinthians accepted by critics? Yeah. And it wouldn't make very good propaganda. You know, it's a description, it's the capital of Greece, and the church is full of, what, incest, drunkenness, infighting. But if you read a book that says Jesus walked on the water, what do you automatically assume if you're an unbeliever? That book's not true. All right, so if you've got people being thrown into furnaces and not being burned up, if you're an unbeliever, that book is not true. If you've got a book where there's accurate prophecy, that book has to be written when? So 2 quick illustrations kind of get us started to look at both sides of this, kind of from believer and unbeliever point of view. I'll ask you this. Earlier this year, in January, a blogger put on the internet that they had found a prophecy from Nostradamus in an old trunk. Daniel 12 says, do what with the book of Daniel? Seal it up. He said he found a Nostradamus prophecy in an old trunk. And in it, it predicted the current Prime Minister of India. It has his name. It has the district he's from and his father's job, which was he sold tea. That's very accurate, right? How many of you believe Nostradamus wrote that? All of you are beginning with the viewpoint that Nostradamus is not a true prophet. And you also don't see anything there to convince you otherwise because it was found when? It said it's found in Old. Now, by the way, his website, it acknowledges it's a spoof. But some of the, if there was an unbeliever here, he would view the book of Daniel the same way you and I would view the Nostradamus prophets. However, let's think about this. Let's take a passage that, for instance, our first manuscript of Daniel, and I hope we can get into this later, our first manuscript of Daniel is really, really close to when they say it was written. But let's take the death of Christ in 30 AD. Do we have documented evidence that Isaiah 53 precedes that? Yeah, all over the place. I mean, it was a quoted book, it was a known book for centuries before. You know, people were familiar with it. It's being cited. And now we've even got, it was translated into Greek long before Jesus ever lived. And now we've got manuscripts from long before Jesus lived. We've got his, so nobody would make this argument. But if you're an unbeliever, or how long, if we had none of that, if we didn't have those manuscripts, if we didn't have that proof Isaiah had been written for, how quickly do you think an unbeliever would look at Isaiah 53 and say this? Well, obviously, the late theology of this text, with a single man, you know, dying for the many and bearing their sins, and justification coming through the death of one man, obviously this has to be written with. Yeah, why don't they make that argument? They can't because the document's there. And so you see just two mental exercise there for just to be seeing, you know, how our own worldviews and other worldviews come into play on this. So if you start with an assumption there can't be prophecy and there can't be miracles, you're already inclined to just reject anything where there were miracles or prophecies. But they've got a number of arguments, and some of the powerful, more significant ones, I would say, would be these. There's the placement argument, the language argument, the silence argument, historical arguments about the 6th century, and then historical arguments related more to the 2nd century. Placement is this. They would say Daniel is not found among the prophets. That was closed by 200 BC. He wasn't in the party, so he wasn't around at that time. They're going to say there's Greek words in there. Like if somebody says, I found the Declaration of Independence, and you're reading it, it says internet. Okay, you know, so you're going to say, I don't think so. And that's the way they view Greek words kind of in there. Silence argument. There's a guy that wrote around 180 to 200 BC, and he gave a long list of Hebrew heroes. Hebrew, you know what I mean. Guess who's not in that list? Daniel's not in that list, and so they say that he wouldn't have known Daniel's time. Daniel's written later. Historical arguments. They will say that certain things about, and it's most of the arguments come to do especially about Belshazzar and Darius the Mede more than Nebuchadnezzar. But for instance, on the things about Nebuchadnezzar's madness or something, they say, we don't have a record of that. So they said the history of Daniel is inaccurate back in the 6th century. Then it gets real accurate coming up to a certain point in Antiochus, and then after that, you can't rely on it. So they say this is where it's written. And so this first part is their argument right there, and the other one that we won't be dealing with this lecture will be the argument over there. And so let's start with and get going because I'm behind schedule, the placement argument. They say Daniel is not found in the prophets. What do you mean they're not found in the prophets? I'm looking at my Bible, and where's Daniel? He's right there in the prophets. This is a Jewish Bible. And if you've got a Jewish Bible, where is Daniel? He's not in the prophets. You got the law of Moses, then you got 8 books of the prophets, and then the 11 writings, and there's Daniel right there. If you stop and think about it, there's a lot of things that, like, look at some other books here, Esther, Ezra, you know, and that has to do with some of the same time period, and you have a lot of narrative and stuff. So there are predictions in Daniel, but it's not, you know, it's different some way than a lot of the prophets, but this is their argument. So, and here's how Hammer puts it, 1976, I think he wrote it. In the Hebrew Bible, the book is not included among the prophetic writings. The Hebrew canon consists of 3 divisions: the law, the prophets, and the writings. Daniel is included in the 3rd and last division. This suggests that the book was not known by 200 BC, about the time when the collection of prophetic writings was assembled. Later, we're going to be talking about the book Ben Sirach. That's the one written with the hero list. That's around 200 BC or so. In it, he goes through and he lists the 12 prophets, you know, in Isaiah and Jeremiah. So there's we have that recognized by that point, and they're saying, because Daniel's not in there, he must not have been known. This is Driver back in 1900, famous commentator. He said, had the book of Daniel, the collection of prophets could hardly have been completed before the 3rd century BC. Had the book of Daniel existed at the time and been believed to be the work of prophets, it's difficult not to think that it had been ranked accordingly. So my question is, that's the current Hebrew order, but what did it used to be? Let's go back to the 1st century. Josephus, in Against Apion, says what? We have not an innumerable multitude of books among us, disagreeing and contradicting one another, as the Greeks have, but only 22 books, 5 belonging to Moses that go from the origins of mankind till his death. So there's 5 right there. And then, as to the time from the death of Moses till the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who reigned after Xerxes, you have the who? The prophets who were after Moses, wrote down in how many books? 13. And the remaining 4 books contain hymns. And by the way, you add that together, 5, 13, 4, it's 22. Why does Josephus say 22 and the current Hebrew Bible has 24? This isn't the point of our thing, but I'll just throw this out there real quick. One possibility is that he's bunching Judges and Ruth together and Jeremiah and Lamentations together. Your Bible has more books in it. It's because you count Jonah and Hosea and all those as 7 books. They count that as 1. You have 1st and 2nd Samuel. For them, that's 1, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what Josephus may be doing, it's in the Septuagint, does the same thing. Judges and Ruth is together, whereas now they're separate. And Jeremiah and Lamentations were together in Septuagint, now they're separate. That's likely what Josephus is doing. Another possibility is that either doesn't have in his list Song of Solomon or Ecclesiastes in the Mishnah, that there were some people that didn't accept those. But I'd be maybe a little more inclined to the first one, perhaps. All right, the 5 books of Moses, now he doesn't name them. And Against Apion, he doesn't give the names. But do we know what the 5 books of Moses would be? Yeah, that's easy. All right, what would be the 4 books that contain hymns to God and precepts for conduct for life? Yeah, got to be Psalms and Proverbs, and maybe Ecclesiastes, maybe Job, maybe Song of Solomon, but it's got to be there. Is there any room for Daniel in there? So where's Daniel going to be? Daniel's got to fit in here in the 13. And maybe that order right there, or if he doesn't have Judges and Ruth together and Jeremiah and Lamentations together, suggesting it may be like that. But either way, Daniel was in there. How do we know? Because this isn't the only time that Josephus talks about Daniel. Here he doesn't mention him by name, but in Antiquities he says, concerning Daniel and what befell him at Babylon, we believe that Daniel conversed with God, for not only did he prophesy, as did the other prophets, and all these things did this man leave in writing, insomuch those that read his prophecies. Okay, so when we put this with the other one in 1st century AD, now some other Jews might have counted it different, but in 1st century AD, a Jewish Pharisee put Daniel where? Smack dab in the prophets. All right, but not just him. Melito of Sardis, who lived about 170, is cited by Eusebius. He repeats his writing. Says he writes as follows: Melito to his brother, and he says, "When I went to the east, came to the place where these things were preached, I learned accurately the books of the Old Testament, and I send them to you as written below. And they are of Moses, 5 books, and of the prophets. Look at there, Daniel, right in the prophets. Also, if you look at the Septuagint, here's the writings, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and such. Here's your prophets, and there's Daniel. In fact, you can see, by the way, they have a table of contents, with page numbers and everything. So there's Ezekiel is on page 1143, and then Daniel's on page 1206. So, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Daniel the prophet, and of course, for us as Christians, what's especially important on the question of whether or not Daniel was counted in the prophets. Now, spoken of by the prophet Daniel. So, when we put that together, Josephus in the prophets, Melito from his source in these in the prophets, Septuagint source in the in the prophets, Dead Sea Scrolls, and of course the New Testament. So, regardless of what order they've collected it in now, what do we have in the evidence here? Daniel and the prophets. All right, so moving on to the language argument. The Greek words in the book of Daniel. The date and composition of the book of Daniel have been fixed with an absolute certainty. It's a Palestinian work of the year 169 or 168 before the Christian era. Hebrew and Aramaic dialect, known as Biblical Aramaic, may have to use alternately, but our author goes even further and does not hesitate to give his work a still stronger polyglottic character by introduction of Persian and Greek words. And this is the statement from Driver. The Persian words presuppose a period after the Persian Empire had been well established. The Greek words demand, the Hebrew supports, and the Aramaic permits a date after the conquest of Palestine by Alexander the Great. So we're not going to worry about those other ones. We're going to focus on which one. The Greek demands it has to be written later. Farrar says, the startling fact that it contains at least 3 Greek words. There's 9,001 words, by the way, in Hebrew in the book of Daniel. The startling fact that it contains at least 3 Greek words have always been to me a strong confirmation of the view that the book of Daniel in its present form, that apostrophe shouldn't be there, is not older than the days of Antiochus, of scribal error, of Antiochus Epiphanes. Here's the 3 Greek words. They're all musical. It's in Daniel 3. When you hear the sound of the instruments, you need to bow down and worship that thing. And you have the lyre. Now, in the text, they're Aramaic, but they're transliterations with Greek words behind it. So here you see the Aramaic, but behind that is the Greek word ketharos. I shouldn't try to pronounce a Greek word in front of Jeff, but there's that word. Then you have psalterion, which is translated as harper, psalter, and stuff. And then this word, King James has dulcimer. A lot of versions have bagpipe. A couple of versions have in symphony, because it's the Greek word symphonia, by the way, and it can be used either way. One, Holman's has drum, assuming it gets into another argument stuff. But the word there, the Greek symphonia. So there's 3 Greek words, and there are Greek words behind that. Okay, is it true that Hellenism and the Greek language with it was spread by the conquests of Alexander, who comes through like in the 320s? Amen? That doesn't mean there wasn't contact with Greeks earlier. For example, Pythagoras, fairly famous Greek guy. Now, we don't have records of everybody that went back and forth, but we'll just sample a few to give an idea. Everybody's heard of Pythagoras. If you ever had math, you heard about the Pythagorean theorem. He's known as the father of mathematics. He's also, I've seen him called the father of music. He is supposed to have gathered the Greek modes into a definite system, to have invented the science of acoustics, increased the strings of the lyre to 15, and founded a brotherhood based on music. So this is a Greek guy that knows a lot about music. Guess where he was in the 5th century BC? He was in Babylon. Now he's a little bit late. He gets there after the fall of Babylon in 525. Babylon fell in 529. So we're not saying that he's the one that brought in the 3 instruments and gave them to Nebuchadnezzar, who's already dead. But we're just showing with our limited knowledge, if we've got a famous Greek with a lot of music knowledge in the country at the time, then we're not on firm ground to say there's no way Babylonians in the 6th century would know anything about Greek music or anything like that. Now, this guy, Alcaeus of Mytilene, was a Greek lyric poet, that you would do with the lyre. And he is associated with this woman who is very famous in Greek history. She's one of the great 9 lyric poets and very, very honored in Greek history. He did not go to Babylon. She did not go to Babylon, but they play a lot on their Greek instruments. And they're in the right time period. He's born in the 6th century BC. He didn't go to Babylon, but guess who did? His older brother. In fact, his older brother fought with Nebuchadnezzar in the capture of Jerusalem. Okay? And so, do you suppose he was the only Greek guy in the army there? And when he came back, Alcaeus, made a little song about his great exploits there and that type of thing. Plus, one thing that kings do is collect things from other places, right? What did Solomon do? You remember his navy went out and he brought in peacocks. If you lived in the middle of a place that had a bunch of peacocks, you might get used to it. They're pretty spectacular. But when you're king, you like to bring in things from other places. Here we have Sennacherib. What's he carrying away from Jerusalem? Now this is before, let's remember, as David just went over with us, before you had the Babylonian Empire being the big dog on the block, who was the big dog on the block? Yeah, and when they had taken over Israel, guess what one of the things they took? Do you see the instruments here of these Hebrew musicians being taken off as captives? And besides Hebrew musicians, we have, this is from ISBE, it refers to inscriptions where he carried away many Greek captives to Nineveh in 700 BC. So if you had Greek people in Nineveh in 700 BC, and then Babylon captures that, I'm not saying those guys are still alive, but in other words, you've got Greeks in the area. And plus, we can see that the Babylonians were interested in music from elsewhere. Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon, the Jews, we sat down and wept, we remembered Zion. On the willows where we hung our lyres, our captors required of us songs. And our tormentors were saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So there was an interest in hearing music itself from elsewhere. There's also ration tablets showing that there were Greeks there in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And recently, this is linguistic dating of biblical texts. This is not a conservative text. The people writing this don't accept an early date of Daniel. They're just talking about the argument of how you date texts. It is generally accepted among contemporary scholars, contrary to S.R. Driver's insistence, Greek linguistic elements in biblical texts do not demand a date in the Hellenistic period. And it says right here, scholars find Greek loanwords in biblical Hebrew have commonly placed them in an earlier period in what they consider earlier sources. It is widely acknowledged that cultural interaction with Greeks was not limited to a late period. It seems safe to conclude that if there are Greek loanwords in biblical Hebrew, they do not have any clear chronological implications for the text in which they are found. Now, there's another argument that they'll make about the age, because Driver says on the one word, he says that's an ancient word. That could have been, but these words, and in particular, there's a thing about Psalterians. Somebody wants to ask about that. There's some really interesting information you can ask about that later. Don't have time to deal with it here. All right, the silence argument. So the book Ecclesiasticus, which is not Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiasticus, and there's so many different names this book is known by. The Wisdom of Sirach, the Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach, Sirach ben Sirah, book of the all virtuous wisdom of Joshua ben Sirah. So it's maybe kind of like Darius the Mede, has more than one name. But it's a book dated from about 200 to 180 BC, and it's got a long hero list. And this Driver says this: Jesus, son of Sirach, in his enumeration of famous Israelites, though he mentions Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and collectively the 12 minor prophets. So that's how they would say they know there's, for instance, one way they know that by 200 or so you had a collection of those 12, because he calls them the 12, is silent as to Daniel. In view of the remarkable distinctions attained by Daniel and the faculties displayed by him according to the book, The statement in Ecclesiasticus that no man had ever been born like Joseph seems certainly suggests the writer was unacquainted with the narratives respecting Daniel. We'll talk about that in just a second. So he's not mentioned. Now here's what's in there. Let us now praise famous men and our fathers that begat us, such as did bear rule in their kingdoms, etc., etc., etc. By the way, I didn't include this one, but let me just mention it. Such as found out musical tunes and recited verses in writing. From the book of, this is not a main biblical character, but from the book of Psalms, what names come to mind of people that composed verses? David and Asaph, yeah. Well, David's in the list, Asaph isn't. Does that mean he'd never heard of Asaph? But here's who he's got. Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 12 tribes, Moses, Aaron, tribes of Israel, Phineas, David, Joshua, Caleb, the judges, Samuel, Nathan, David, Solomon, Elias, that is Elijah, and then Ezekiel, that's Hezekiah, Esai, that's Isaiah, Josiah, that's Josiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the 12, Zerubbabel, and then Jesus, Joshua, priest afterwards, high priest, and then we have Nehemiah. What are some names, by the way, that you notice are missing? Okay, but he's a bad guy, and so these are heroes. It's a hero. And by the way, like Sarah, it makes the Hebrews 11 list, but she's not here. But he said we're going to praise men and the fathers who begot. So it's going to just be men. Is anybody famous? He's got Josiah. Yeah, Adam's not there. Who else? Joseph's not there. This is the point at which, in my vision, Mrs. Ben Sirach walked in and said, "You forgot Adam, and you forgot Joseph." Because then he goes, "Upon the earth was no man created like Enoch," he was saying from the earth, "neither was a young man born like Joseph, the governor of his brethren, said to be Sem, Seth, and Adam." Now, the reason I think this is clear, this afterthought, you see how chronological all of this is? And then these aren't. So it seems to be an afterthought, whether his wife pointed it out or he just thought of it himself. But, yeah, granted, Daniel is not there. So you see the force of the argument. In reply, I would say this. Here's some other people that aren't there. Even after he remembered a few to put on the end, there's no Abel, Melchizedek, Job, Boaz, Jonathan, Ezra, Mordecai, and he almost left out Joseph. The first ones, though, really don't fit his parameters, all right? Because he said, "and our fathers that begot us." So let's take off those. And some of these aren't as outstanding. But Ezra is really a main figure in post-exilic, among the Jews. That's a main figure. Why isn't he there? Reply number 2. This is a little bit unusual because of the date and the way it's worded. But in the text of Ezekiel, which he cited, what does it have in the text of Ezekiel? Even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they would deliver only their own lives. Now, the difficulty there is what? From the language in that text, does it sound like he's talking about current people? And Daniel wouldn't have been, this wouldn't have been the end of Daniel's life at this point. This would be earlier on. It sounds more like he's talking about, even if those people. But you could have 2 old ones and 1 contemporary in there. And he's talking about some Daniel. And he mentions Daniel again when he says, "Are you wiser than Daniel? No secret is hidden from you." So if you've got Ezekiel in 200 BC, and if it mentions Daniel, and if that's our Daniel that secrets were not hidden from, then he's there anyway. But then you have this. Let's compare Hebrews and Wisdom of Sirach. In Sirach and Hebrews, right? In Sirach, you have Elijah, Hezekiah, and Josiah, and Nehemiah. Are any of those guys mentioned in Hebrews 11? Are they great men of faith? Aren't they in Hebrews 11? Well, that clearly proves that no one in the 1st century AD had ever heard of Elijah, Hezekiah, Josiah, and Nehemiah, right? No, it doesn't prove anything of the sort. It means when the Hebrew writer put in his list, those weren't people that are in the list that is written down. Not everybody's there. In fact, toward the end of Hebrews, he says what? Time would fail me if, in fact, he doesn't even mention Daniel by name, just by, and, stop the mouths of lions. So the fact that those are not in Hebrews doesn't mean that they were unknown in 50 to 70 AD. And look from Hebrews. Abel, Melchizedek, Daniel. Does that mean that since they're not mentioned there, they were unknown there? That's not an automatic assumption. Neither list has every name that you have on it. But then here's the kicker. And if you recall, Driver pointed this out. It's not just that Daniel's not there. It said there was never a young man born like Joseph. Now, don't look at that. Just think about the phrase. Who would you say in the Bible is more like Joseph than anybody else? Daniel. So how could you say never a man like Joseph? Well, he also said this. Upon earth there was no man created like Enoch, because he was, oh wait, that's right. So clearly he never heard of Elijah, right? No, because there he's got Elijah taken away in the whirlwind right there. At this point in his list, I don't know if it was late or what, but those who are expecting him to be more technically accurate than he is are maybe looking for a little bit too much. He has just said Elijah was taken away by the whirlwind and said there's never anybody like Enoch who was taken up from the earth. Plus, what is it? What did we thought when you said he's like Joseph? What are you thinking of? Young man taken into captivity, dreams, vision. Is that what he's focused on? Neither was a young man born like Joseph, a governor of his brethren, stay of the people whose bones were regarded of the Lord. That's not as much like Daniel as the points that we might have been thinking of. So I think we can, and here's a possible motive. He may have heard of Daniel and didn't want to include him. Later rabbis rejected him because of his Epicurean tendencies, and he did not believe in a future life and, of course, no resurrection. To Ben Sira's Epicurean tendency must be attributed to his denial of a future life and pre-Sadducean reverence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, what do you have in Daniel chapter 12? So he might have known about the book of Daniel and had a motive for not including it. All right, so moving on now. So how many minutes we got? Okay. Historical arguments from the 6th century, and there's 3 of them that we'll look at here, and then we'll be wrapped up. Belshazzar. They're going to say 2 things. Besides, of course, they're not going to believe there was handwriting wall and stuff like that, but their historical argument. They're going to say he wasn't a king, and they're going to say he was not the son of Nebuchadnezzar. And so those are 2 arguments we'll look at first, and then we'll look at Darius the Mede. Was he a king or not? What does the book of Daniel say? Belshazzar, the king, made a feast. Daniel 5, verse 30. And that night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Hammer says, Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. He was heir to the throne and may have acted as regent in his father's absence, but he was never actually king. Driver says, Belshazzar is represented as king of Babylon. In point of fact, Nabonidus, that's Nabonidus, was the last king of Babylon. Let's talk about him just for a second so we have it kind of straight. Here's what happened in what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar reigns for a long time, and after he dies, who's going to go on the throne? His son, Evil Merodach, or Merodach, something like that. Evil Merodach goes on the throne. Now, what happened to him later, his brother-in-law, who was married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, murders him. So now that guy's on the throne. who is not the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but his wife is a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. When he dies, his son, who would be a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, is put on the throne, but he's just a boy, and within 9 months, there's a conspiracy, and they kill him. Nabonidus is chosen, or had manipulated, you don't know the history, but they say he was chosen then to rule after that, and he doesn't claim any royal blood at all. He says, you know, I have nobody, you know, he's just kind of like a blue-collar usurper. So he usurps the throne. He emphasizes that he doesn't, you know, he doesn't have a royal pedigree or anything. He's not related to Nebuchadnezzar. And he is going to go away to Tema for a long time, for a few years. And he's going to leave his son, Belshazzar, there in Babylon. And they're saying Belshazzar was the son of this blue-collar usurper Nabonidus. Oh, that might not be the best term, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. And what they say, so Belshazzar is represented as king of Babylon? No, it was Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon. Okay. ISB makes this point. The city of Babylon alone, those that ruled just the city, in other words, think the difference between the Babylonian Empire and the city or the district. ISBE says that sometimes it was apparently it was governed by an official that was called a king. Because here's two guys, I'm not going to try to pronounce them. One of them certainly, and the father of this one certainly, and the father of the other one probably called king of Babylon. But when you look at the king lists of the empire, neither of them are there. So sometimes you had a more localized sense of king in there. But we can do better than that, because here we have, as for me, Nabonidus, and my son, Belshazzar, etc. And then here you have, the king was in Tema, the prince in Babylonia. And then look at this, verse account from Nabonidus, acquired by the British Museum in 1880. He, Nabonidus, entrusted the camp to his oldest son, the firstborn. The troops everywhere in the country he ordered under his command. That would be Belshazzar's. He let everything go, now look here, entrusted the kingship to him. Okay, if in their own inscriptions it says that he went away and he left everything to him and entrusted the kingship to him, why does anybody have a right to complain that the Bible called him king? So, and it makes sense with this. When he's sitting there and they're drinking stuff out of the vessels from the thing, and all of a sudden he saw the handwriting on the wall, very literally, and his knees begin to shake and he's scared to death, and he's saying, bring the soothsayers and wise men, anybody can do this, I'll give them what? Third place in the kingdom. He's offering something big, but first place is not available, second place is not available. He's offering what? Third place in the kingdom. That's just kind of a curious number if there's not a reason for it. And so, yeah, king. Now, son of Nebuchadnezzar. I need to hurry up here. This says Belshazzar's daddy was Nabonidus. Daniel says Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Right here. Belshazzar commanded the vessels that his father had taken. Nebuchadnezzar, your father. God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father. Hammer says, one would expect a writer in the 6th century to be more reasonably accurate, but such is not the case. Belshazzar is represented as the son of Nebuchadnezzar, although he was the son of Nabonidus. Driver. Belshazzar is represented as king. Nebuchadnezzar is spoken of as his father. In point of fact, Nabonidus was the last king. He was a usurper, not related to Nebuchadnezzar. His father's name was Nabu-Baluk-Tu-Ikbi. And Belshazzar is mentioned in the inscriptions as his son. So it's not like he can be the grandson through Nabonidus, because that's not where Nabonidus came from. So how on earth, if his daddy is Nabonidus and Nabonidus isn't descended from Nebuchadnezzar, how on earth could he possibly be a son of Nebuchadnezzar? Well, here's Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he was succeeded by evil Merodach, murdered by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar, changing color, because this guy is not in the yellow line there. But then when he's succeeded by his son, this guy, if assuming that it was through the wife that he married to Nebuchadnezzar instead of another wife, would be a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. He's killed in conspiracy. Then you have the Nabonidus and Belshazzar. And then 539 comes in. Belshazzar gets killed that night. Nabonidus submits. He gets to continue. How, if he's the son of him in their own records, and the Bible says he's son of Nebuchadnezzar, how would that work? Well, let's compare it to this. Labushi-Marduk, who's his father? Neriglissar. Everybody knows that. But since Neriglissar was married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, who would his grandfather be, if that's the wife he was born to? Nebuchadnezzar. He would be the son of this guy, but the grandson of that guy. Well, if that worked for Labushi-Marduk, couldn't it have worked for this case as well? And is there any circumstantial evidence to maybe support that, besides the fact that in Daniel 5 we have, of course, that's what they're arguing against. But in Daniel 5 it says he's the son. ISB, by the way, also makes an argument for how sometimes things are called the son of a king even when you're not related to him. The point in Daniel 5 seems stronger than that to me. But besides the fact of saying that he's son, there's also this circumstantial evidence of how it might be so through the mom. And this is, first off, just reminding ourselves generationally. Solomon, who's David called? His father. And that's his direct father. Now, great-great-grandfather, Ahaz's great-great-grandfather is David, but is still called what? Father. In Asa, it's his great times 10 grandfather, but it's still called what? His father. So for Nebuchadnezzar to be his father, he doesn't have to be the first generation. He can be first or second, whatever. Now, look at our feast there in Daniel chapter 5. King Belshazzar made a great feast. Who is with him right there? His wives and concubines, right? It mentions them twice. They're there drinking with him. When he sees the handwriting on the wall and his knees start shaking, he's scared, and he makes a proclamation. You know, I'll give this stuff to anybody that can tell me what this is. Who hears about it and comes to the banquet hall? The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall. Is that Belshazzar's wife? Where were the wives? The wives they were there drinking with him. So the queen is not his wife. So what kind of queen would this be? This is, I believe, the queen mother. Who's his father? His Nabonidus. So I believe this is Nabonidus' wife. And she comes in. Now, who's with him at the feast? His wives. Who's not there? The queen mother, I believe it is. And who told him about Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel? You read the text, and it's not, by the time Belshazzar says to Daniel, I've heard of you, I don't think he's talking about from years ago. I think he's talking about from a few minutes ago. You read the text, the queen mother comes in, and she says, there is a man in the days of your father, Nebuchadnezzar. And she starts talking about the history between and the things that Daniel was able to do for him. And she shows all this, she shows more knowledge about the past and more knowledge about Nebuchadnezzar in this regard. So what does that suggest? Different generation. And if she's not related to Nebuchadnezzar, how would she know all this stuff? Doesn't make perfect sense if that was Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. She would know more about her father, who she grew up under, than this guy would. All right, real quickly. Oh, yeah, this is, time got away. All right. Where's Darius the Mede? There's a previous game to this called Where's King Belshazzar? We have not found Darius the Mede outside of Scripture or accounts based on Scripture, like, say, Josephus. The Bible records Darius the Mede, but you will not find an inscription that says, here lies Darius the Mede. But they used to say this about Belshazzar also. This is 1850, Ferdinand Hitzig, and he's saying, when we compare Daniel with history, you know, we know the name of the Babylonian king was Nabonidus, but in Daniel, he invents a new name. And here again, even if the king of the Medes in question had existed, Daniel gives him the wrong name. He calls him Darius, and the other one he gets wrong is he calls Nabonidus Belshazzar. See, he doesn't know about Belshazzar, so he thinks Daniel's calling Nabonidus Belshazzar. He says, Daniel got that wrong. This is von Lingerk, 1835. The lateness of the date is clear. Historical inaccuracies, errors in chronology, et cetera, et cetera. Not only blah, 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 gives a false name. I need to hurry through this. Here's some more. Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar, last king of Babylon, that's contrary to historical incorrectness. And gives an incorrect name, 1835 there, another guy. Notice the date of Hitzig, 1850. All he had to do was wait 3 more years. Because 1853, John Taylor, British official, what is now known as Iraq, is commissioned to do some digs, and they go there doing the ziggurat of Ur. It had been rebuilt by Nabonidus. And guess what they found in each of the 4 corners? And it had lots of information about the construction project, but in there was a prayer, and it said this: as for Nabonidus, king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead and grant me as a present long days. And as for Belshazzar, the eldest son, now it's spelled differently, but of course you have various spelling. Everybody understands this is Belshazzar. My offspring do this and this. So there's Belshazzar. At which point all the unbelievers realized Daniel should be taken seriously. No, this is some online stuff. Debunking Hitzig and let's see, a fundy whack job cites this Bar article and stuff. It's an old thread. It's a fundamentalists are liars. You know, the quote's a hoax. I put it in Wikipedia yesterday. You know, there's never any such thing. That's one reason I went and I showed you the actual journal so that you can see, yeah, they really did say that. By the way, if you go to in Wikipedia, they even had this. It has been charged that certain fundamentalists were wrong, and this is now, yeah, Hitzig really did say that, but it stood that way in Wikipedia from 2006 to 2015. Okay? And if you look now, for instance, Wikipedia, Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Nabonidus went into exile. So, have we found Darius the Mede in that name yet? But remember what happened with him. Now, where's Darius the Mede? Do I have 1 minute or are we done? 1 minute. Where's Darius the Mede? 2 minutes. Okay, good. We're going to skip that. We're going to skip that. We're going to skip that. There's an article about this. If you'll Google Anderson and Young, Remembrance of Darius, you'll be able to find a lot of the information that I'm about to go here. All right, Daniel tells about Darius the Mede. Maybe Berosus does, maybe Happocration does. Here's what Happocration mentions. This is a derrick. This is a very valuable coin. On eBay, it's going to cost you $5,000 something. It was a pure gold coin, and it's usually thought to be named after Darius the Great, who was a later king down the line a little bit from Cyrus. But look at this. Classical dictionary. The derrick, Persian coin of purest gold, who the Darius was from whom the coin received it has never been clearly ascertained, but according to the scholars Aristophanes and Happocration, the derrick did not obtain its name from the son of Hystaspes, that's Darius the Great, but from a more ancient king by the name of Darius. Now, Darius the Mede wouldn't really be ancient, but sometimes you can have that kind of lost being passed down. But there are people who are saying that there was a previous King Darius that's actually named after. And then if we can get to him, maybe in the question, if somebody wants to ask about him, we can talk a little bit about him, but my time's up. Thank you.
All right. 2 minutes. We can start our next discussion period at 3:30.